I had exactly 21 days left until I officially stepped down from Halden Dynamics, a company I had poured nearly 2 decades of my life into. 18 years of constant travel, late-night strategy calls, and weekends spent buried in procurement briefs. It had become more than just a job. It was a part of me. But I was ready to close that chapter. My exit plan was clear and organized, just like everything I had ever done for Halden. My farewell dinner was already scheduled. The team had ordered a custom cake with my face airbrushed on it, and my successor, an internal candidate I had helped train, was briefed and ready to take over. All that remained was the final signature on the biggest deal of my entire career, a $120 million technology partnership with Arcturus Advanced Systems. This deal was not just a line item on a revenue report. It was a year in the making. I had spent months working side by side with Daniel Reese, the lead procurement officer at Arcturus, aligning 2 very different companies with different cultures and different timelines into one unified project. We negotiated everything from data security terms to cross-border licensing. I even flew out to Nevada twice just to smooth over miscommunication between our legal teams. This deal was not just business. It was personal. It was the crown jewel of my exit, my final proof that the years I had spent building Halden's defense contracts division had not been in vain. That morning, I arrived at the office early, as always. The sun was barely up, but the 6th floor was already buzzing. I walked past the open office space where my team was gathering around coffee, waving and smiling. I gave a nod to my executive assistant, who handed me the final draft of the contract to review before our meeting with Arcturus the following afternoon. I had done this kind of thing dozens of times, but I still read every word. Every detail had to be perfect. By 11 o'clock, I had just finished going over the final checklist when I received an internal message from Charles Whitmore, our chief executive officer. It was brief, 5 words. "Can you come upstairs now?" Charles had never been a particularly warm leader, but I respected him. He built Halden from a mid-tier engineering firm into a government-recognized defense innovator. Over the years, we had developed a working relationship built on pragmatism and mutual benefit. We were not friends, but we understood each other. So when I walked into his office and saw him standing by the window, staring out over the city with the coffee he was not drinking, I knew something was off. He turned slowly, smiled at me, but it was not the kind of smile that reaches the eyes. It was tight, practiced, the kind of smile people use when they are about to say something they know will land like a punch. "Maya," he said, drawing out my name just a little longer than usual. "You have done incredible work here, truly. But I think it is time we bring in some new energy, some fresh direction for the future of Halden." I just stood there, confused. I had no idea what he meant. He kept talking. "We have decided to fast-track the leadership transition, effective immediately. Your responsibilities will be handed over today, and we will let your successor take the lead on the Arcturus project." At first, I thought he meant the man I had trained, the person I had been preparing to take over for the last 3 months. I even opened my mouth to say something, maybe to offer my support. But then he said her name. "Isabelle will take over from here. She is more than ready. I think you will be proud." I blinked. Isabelle? As in Isabelle Whitmore, his daughter, the one who had shadowed me for 2 months, mostly asking basic questions and spending half her time adjusting filters on her phone. The same Isabelle who once asked me if we sold actual weapons and whether defense procurement was like running a startup for tanks. That Isabelle. My mind raced. None of this made sense. The project was at a critical stage. Arcturus needed continuity, not someone who had never been in a boardroom alone. I tried to speak, to ask what the hell was going on, but Charles cut me off with a wave of his hand. "You should take the rest of the day. Relax. You have earned it." He sat down, picked up a stack of papers, and just like that, the meeting was over. I walked out of that office in a daze, clutching the final draft of a contract I would no longer be allowed to deliver. And as the elevator doors closed in front of me, I could still see him through the glass wall, smiling that same cold smile, already dialing someone new. Charles leaned back in his leather chair like a man who had just delivered good news. His fingers were steepled, his eyes calm, almost detached. I sat across from him in disbelief, trying to process the words that had just come out of his mouth. "We are making an executive transition," he had said, like it was just a minor change on a Monday schedule. Not a career-ending decision, not a betrayal, just a transition. No handshake, no thank you. No appreciation for 18 years of building the very department they were now handing over to someone else. I kept waiting for the real reason to surface, something that made sense. But the next name he said turned everything inside me cold. "Isabelle is going to take point moving forward," he continued, as if her name belonged in that sentence. I blinked. I actually blinked, thinking I had misheard. Isabelle Whitmore, his daughter, the one who had shadowed me for exactly 2 months last summer. The same Isabelle who once walked into a strategy meeting 10 minutes late because she was stuck editing a makeup tutorial on her phone. The same woman who, during a procurement briefing, had leaned over and whispered if we were shopping for planes on eBay. That Isabelle. And now she was going to take point on a $120 million deal that was already teetering on the edge of technical complexity. I tried to keep my voice even, professional. "Charles, with all due respect, Isabelle has not even completed a full quarter in any operations role. The Arcturus contract involves compliance, federal systems access, and years of relationship building. We are in the final stretch. This is not the time for experimentation." He nodded, lips tight. "I understand your concern. But we believe a new voice, a fresh perspective, is what Halden needs right now. Isabelle brings energy, creativity, and a vision aligned with where we are going." What he meant was that she brought a last name that matched the company's highest office. What he meant was that Isabelle was not just a daughter, she was a legacy, one that had never waited in line, never missed a shortcut, never been asked to prove she belonged before being handed a seat at the table. It was not about strategy. It was not about merit. It was about power and bloodlines. And I was being removed, not for what I lacked, but because I stood in the way of someone else's fast track. I did not respond right away. I just sat there, breathing through my nose, feeling the heat rise up into my face. I had spent my entire career believing that if you worked hard enough, produced results, and stayed sharp, you would be rewarded. Maybe not celebrated, but at least respected. But now, in the quiet hum of that office, it hit me that none of it mattered. Not the overnight flights, not the last-minute pitch decks, not the weekend sacrificed. I was never going to be part of this new version of Halden. I was not legacy. I was a placeholder, easily swapped out when it became politically convenient. "Of course," I said finally, voice tight, trying not to show how deeply it cut. "Let me know how you would like the transition to go. I assume this means I no longer need to attend tomorrow's call with Arcturus?" Charles nodded. "We will handle it from here. And Maya," he added, his tone softening as if that would somehow ease the sting. "We are truly grateful for all you have done. This is not personal." But it was personal. It always is when someone strips you of your identity and calls it a business decision. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and walked out of that office without another word. As I reached the elevator, Isabelle passed me in the hallway, wearing a pale pink blazer that looked brand new. She smiled like this was all normal, like we were just trading shifts on a casual Friday. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button, and forced myself not to look back. I knew right then, as the door slid shut, that something inside me had changed. I was not just leaving Halden. I was being pushed out, silently, without ceremony, without cause. And if they thought I was going to fade away quietly, they did not know me at all. The next morning, I arrived at the office just after 7, like I always had. I took the same elevator, held my coffee in the same right hand, and even gave a quick nod to the security guard at the front desk, though he barely nodded back. When I tapped my badge against the scanner, it gave off a low red blink instead of the usual green. I tried again, more out of habit than confusion. Still red. That was when I knew. They had already locked me out. Without so much as a warning, without a thank you, they had flipped a switch overnight and shut me out like I was a temp whose contract had expired. I stood there for a moment, staring at the scanner, my fingers wrapped tight around the lanyard. The receptionist avoided eye contact. A junior analyst I had mentored 2 years ago ducked into a meeting room as I turned toward him. It was strange, almost surreal. I had expected, at the very least, a card or maybe a hallway hug. Instead, the silence was louder than any exit speech I could have given. When I finally got inside, thanks to someone else swiping their badge behind me, I walked to my office and paused at the door. My nameplate was gone, not just removed, replaced. In its place was a sleek new piece of brushed metal, with Isabelle Whitmore's name etched into it. She had not even been in the building more than 2 hours this week, but somehow her name had already claimed the space I had worked in for nearly 2 decades. I opened the door slowly, half expecting someone to stop me. But the room was still mine. For now. My plants were still on the windowsill. My books lined the same shelves. The photo of my niece and I at the company holiday gala 3 years ago still sat on the edge of the desk. No one came to say goodbye. No one asked if I needed help carrying anything. The same people who used to swing by my door to ask for guidance or approval were now suddenly buried in their screens. I could feel their eyes on me, though, glancing up, then away. I was a ghost now, and the building had no interest in hosting ghosts. I packed in silence, folding my cardigans into the tote bag I kept under the desk, slipping paperweights and pens into a small box. The only sound was the low hum of the HVAC and the quiet rustle of cardboard. I did not cry. I did not speak. I did not slam the door when I left. I simply gathered my life piece by piece and walked out the same way I had come in, quietly, efficiently, and without leaving a mess. What Charles did not know, or maybe knew but never cared to ask, was that the security framework for the Arcturus contract had been built from the ground up by me, not by a vendor, not by some off-the-shelf encryption tool. It was a proprietary biometric verification protocol designed to run on one secure workstation, in one secure office, through one secure profile, mine. The system required live authorization, using facial recognition, retinal scan, and a multi-stage authentication key only I held. It was not out of arrogance, it was out of necessity. The sensitivity of the deal and the federal requirements made it the safest choice. Everyone signed off on it, Charles included. That workstation, the one they had casually reassigned to Isabelle, had been the only physical endpoint capable of authenticating the final phase of the deal. Without me, without the exact conditions I had built into the protocol, the contract would stall indefinitely. I had informed no one else of the final access chain. It had been designed that way to reduce the risk of insider threats. Now, ironically, it had become their greatest vulnerability. I did not plan revenge, not yet. I did not send a message or make a scene. What I did was walk out of Halden Dynamics with my head held high and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that while they had erased me from the walls, the foundation they relied on still carried my signature. They thought they could erase 18 years in a boardroom, but the system I had built would soon remind them how wrong they were. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind I used to look forward to during the chaos of corporate life. The tea was warm in my hand, the sun spilled through the kitchen window, and for the first time in months I had no alarms, no meetings, no back-to-back strategy calls. I had just settled into the corner of my couch, flipping through the news on my tablet, when I nearly dropped my cup. There she was, Isabelle Whitmore, plastered across the front page of Emergent Business Weekly, smiling like she had just discovered fire. The headline read, "Young Visionary Leads Halden into Next-Gen Aerospace Era." I stared at it for a long time, then let out a short, breathless laugh. I clicked the article out of morbid curiosity. There, in glossy print, were words that made my stomach turn. According to the story, Isabelle had spearheaded a groundbreaking deal with Arcturus Advanced Systems, positioning Halden Dynamics as a global leader in high-integrity defense architecture. She was quoted as saying the partnership would redefine trust between private contractors and the federal sector. It was surreal, as if someone had taken my last 18 months of work, scrubbed my name off, and handed the credit to a woman who could not distinguish a procurement schedule from a product brochure. Then I found the interview video. It had been filmed in a bright white office I recognized immediately. My old conference room. She sat in the seat I used to use for negotiations, wearing a tailored white blazer, her hair pulled back, looking every bit the image of corporate polish, until she opened her mouth. "We are thrilled to be partnering with Arcturus," she said, smiling proudly as the interviewer nodded, clearly unfamiliar with the actual name of the client. This deal is a reflection of Halden's innovative roots and my personal commitment to futuristic leadership. Arcturus, that was how she pronounced it. Not once, not twice, but 3 separate times in the same interview. The worst part was not the mispronunciation. It was the confidence. The kind of blinding confidence that comes when you have never been told no, when no one has ever challenged you to earn the seat you sit in. She believed every word. And why would she not? The world had handed her a narrative, and she was playing her part perfectly. That was when it really hit me. Charles was not playing a long game. He was not thinking about stability or experience or legacy. He was playing to headlines, betting on image over substance, flash over function. The moment he replaced me, he had not just discarded a strategy. He had gambled a $120 million contract on someone who had never closed a deal in her life. And he was proud of it. I turned off the video and sat in silence, watching the steam curl out of my forgotten cup. Part of me was angry. Of course I was. Watching someone else publicly take credit for your work, especially someone so wildly unqualified, cuts deep. But there was something else underneath it. Something sharper. A strange, calm satisfaction. Because I knew something Charles and Isabelle did not. The deal was not done. The contract was not complete. And the system they needed to finalize it? Still locked. Still bound to my credentials. Still sitting in a protocol only I could access. Let them bask in their spotlight, I thought. Let them strut across magazine covers and collect awards for work they did not do. Let them talk about the future like it was already theirs. Because when the moment came, and it would come, reality would not care about good lighting or polished sound bites. Reality only answers to results. And results require more than charm and inherited titles. They require knowledge, commitment, integrity, all the things they had tossed aside the second they showed me the door. So I closed the article, refilled my tea, and waited. Not with bitterness, not with vengeance, just patience. Because no matter how high you climb on borrowed wings, the ground always has a way of reminding you who actually built the runway. I had never spoken about it publicly, not in meetings, not in presentations, not even in passing conversations over coffee. But the truth was simple. The final phase of the Arcturus deal required more than just a digital signature or a shared login. It required live biometric authentication, run through a secure workstation I had spent nearly 9 months designing. That workstation was located in my old office, tethered to my employee ID, and built to respond to one verified user, me. The system recognized only my retinal scan, my fingerprint, and a voice key that was updated quarterly. It had been approved by Arcturus's internal security team and signed off by Charles himself. And now, without me, they were locked out. The idea for the biometric protocol had come during one of our early compliance reviews. Arcturus had expressed concerns about access integrity, worried that a multi-million-dollar agreement might be compromised by shared credentials or poor version control. I offered to build something better, something unbreakable. At the time, Charles called it brilliant. He said it gave us an edge. Now it was his biggest problem. Because in his rush to make a clean break, to hand the deal to his daughter and erase me from the process, he had forgotten to ask the one question that mattered. Who holds the key? Back at Halden, they tried everything. Isabelle called the IT team into emergency sessions, asking if they could override the system. They brought in senior engineers, outside consultants, even considered bringing in biometric spoofing tools. But every method they tried hit a dead end. The system flagged all unauthorized access attempts and immediately alerted Arcturus. Every failed attempt was a red mark. Every workaround raised questions. And each day the contract sat unsigned. The tension inside both companies started to build. I heard from a former colleague, someone in logistics who still kept in touch quietly. She told me that Isabelle had been pacing the halls, snapping at interns, asking if anyone had a spare fingerprint or knew what kind of software Maya used to code that thing. They had no idea where to even begin, because it was not just software. It was a hardware-bound protocol using a custom shell I had written myself, combined with real-time facial recognition through a secured neural gateway. The system was built to stop exactly this kind of hijack. It did not trust a title. It trusted proof. Physical, biometric, and irrefutable. They even tried to get to my backup workstation, the one I kept in a secured satellite office. But that one required an additional voice passphrase, a full sentence spoken in my tone, cadence, and pattern. I had trained it for years. No one could replicate that, not even with high-end tools. Isabelle reportedly screamed at one point that they should just fly Maya in and make her do it. But that option had already passed. They had made sure of that the moment they stripped my badge and walked me out like a ghost. Meanwhile, I waited. Not because I had some grand revenge plan, not because I wanted to see anyone suffer, but because I knew this was a storm they had chosen. I had built the system they now needed, and they had thrown out the one person who knew how it worked. It was not malicious. It was just inevitable, like locking yourself out of your own house and realizing you changed the locks the week before, forgetting where you left the key. By the end of the week, the deal had stalled completely. Arcturus began reaching out, asking for updates, wondering why there was no movement. Documents sat unsigned, timelines drifted, and Isabelle, for all her glossy magazine interviews and polished blazers, was learning the hard way that style does not substitute for substance. I did not need to lift a finger. The system did exactly what it was designed to do: protect the integrity of the deal by requiring actual integrity to complete it. And now, as they scrambled behind closed doors, I stayed silent. Calm. Watching the storm build from the safety of a home, I no longer had to leave at 5:30 every morning. The contract was frozen, the headlines were fading, and the face they had used to front it all was cracking under pressure. It was late afternoon when my phone rang. I almost did not answer it. The number was unknown, no caller ID, just a string of digits that told me it was being masked. But something about the timing made me curious. I had just come back from a walk, poured a glass of water, and sat down to check the news when the screen lit up. I let it ring twice, then picked it up. "Maya Townsend?" the voice asked. I recognized it immediately. Daniel Reese, lead procurement officer at Arcturus Advanced Systems. I had worked with Daniel closely for over a year. We had gone through every clause of the contract, every piece of protocol, every compliance requirement. He was not the kind of man who wasted time on pleasantries. So, when I heard his voice and the tone it carried, I sat up straight. "I hope I am not catching you at a bad time," he said, and before I could answer, he continued. "Isabelle sent us a different draft of the agreement this morning. Some of the technical specs are off. A few of the milestone definitions do not match what we signed off on last quarter. Is everything okay on your side?" I paused. For a moment, I considered giving him the polite corporate answer. Something vague, something safe. But then I remembered who I was talking to. Daniel was not easily fooled, and he deserved more than spin. So I said, as evenly as I could, "Let us just say, the people currently at Halden were not in the room when we made those decisions." There was a long silence on the other end. Not the kind that comes from confusion, but the kind that comes from clarity settling in. Daniel exhaled, low and sharp. "That makes sense," he said quietly. I thought something felt off. The tone, the wording. It read like someone trying to reverse engineer the deal from an outside summary. I did not confirm or deny anything. I did not have to. "I do not want to put you in a difficult position," he said, "but this deal is too sensitive to play games with. We are getting pressure from both our legal and federal compliance teams. They are asking why biometric verification has not been completed. And to be honest, we are starting to worry about the integrity of the rollout." I stayed calm. "That concern is valid," I told him. "I would be asking the same questions." I did not offer to fix it. I did not volunteer to step back in. I just let the weight of that silence stretch between us. Because this was the moment I had known would come. When someone on the other side realized they had been sold a polished story but handed a broken engine. Daniel cleared his throat. "Look, I am not trying to step on any internal decisions, but from where I stand, the person we built this deal with is not currently involved. That is a problem." I could hear the background noise on his end, papers shifting, maybe a quiet knock at his door. He was still at the office, probably prepping for the weekly cross-check call that should have included me. "I cannot speak for Halden anymore," I said calmly. "I no longer represent them. But if your team needs clarity on what was agreed upon, you have my number." There was another pause. "That is helpful," he said. "More than you know." We ended the call shortly after. He did not press me further. I did not offer more. But what was left unsaid was louder than anything we had spoken. Arcturus was no longer sure who they were dealing with, and the cracks were starting to show. That night, I sat on my porch as the sun set behind the rooftops. I watched the light fade and thought about how quickly power shifts in this world. 1 week, you are leading the most critical project of your career. The next, you are pushed out, replaced, and scrubbed from the credits. But the truth always finds its way back, especially when the people in charge have no idea how deep the foundation goes. It started as a whisper in one of the industry newsletters, a vague sentence about unexplained complications delaying the Halden Arcturus deal. At first, it was easy to miss, a single paragraph buried beneath merger news and defense funding projections. But in our world, that kind of whisper spreads fast. Within days, it had picked up traction. Analysts started speculating. Had Arcturus pulled out? Had Halden overpromised something they could not deliver? Nobody knew for sure, but one thing was clear. The silence was suspicious. By the end of the week, a handful of reporters were poking around LinkedIn, reaching out to former and current Halden employees for comments. Isabelle's name had already been mentioned in connection with the contract. Her interview, where she had called Arcturus Art Crush, was being passed around like an inside joke. The tone had shifted. What was once a headline about fresh leadership had turned into questions about credibility and competence. The board took notice, and so did Charles. The first message came on a Sunday evening. A simple text. "Hi Maya, would you be open to a quick conversation this week?" No signature, no explanation, just a plain olive branch thrown into the dark. I stared at it for a moment, then locked my phone. I did not reply. On Tuesday, another message followed, longer this time. "We may have gotten off track. I think there is a way forward here if we can talk. Please let me know." Still, I said nothing. I had given them all the access and respect in the world, and they had responded by erasing me like a name on a dry erase board. When the text failed, the tone shifted. A letter arrived via courier on Thursday morning. Thick, expensive stationery. Charles's signature at the bottom in bold black ink. The language was formal but urgent. He requested a private meeting to resolve a number of outstanding issues regarding the Arcturus transaction. He called it time-sensitive. He called it critical. He said he hoped I would respond in the spirit of professional cooperation. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and left it on my dining table for the rest of the day. The following morning, I sent him one line. No greeting, no sign-off, just, "You can speak to me through my attorney." That was when things escalated. The board's legal division started making quiet inquiries about the biometric protocols. Someone had finally noticed the locked system gates. Isabelle had apparently promised them that IT would resolve it internally. But every attempt had failed. The biometric gateway, designed as a multi-layered confirmation loop, could not be disabled or replicated without a complete rebuild, something that would take months and cost a fortune. Worse, Arcturus had noticed, Daniel Reese had not gone public, but he had begun pulling out of scheduled joint briefings. The silence was becoming a statement in itself. Inside Halden, panic was setting in. Spin control only works when you have something to spin. But the story had slipped out of their hands. Their brilliant new executive was nowhere to be found during stakeholder Q&As. No one could explain why contract delivery dates had vanished from the roadmap. Questions mounted, and slowly, the cracks widened. Employees who had once avoided me in the hallway were now updating their resumes. The ship had started to list, and no one at the helm knew how to correct course. From the outside, I stayed quiet. I did not tweet. I did not grant interviews. I did not feed the press. I just let the silence stretch long enough to become its own kind of noise. Because sometimes, the most powerful response is none at all. When you have built something from the ground up, something intricate and secure, people forget that removing you from the equation does not remove your fingerprint, especially when that fingerprint is the only one the system still recognizes. I sipped my coffee that weekend with my phone face down. Let them scramble. Let them issue statements and backtrack and rewrite timelines. I was not in their meetings anymore, and that fact alone had become the biggest problem they could not solve. And the worst part? The world had just begun to notice. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock sharp at Teresa Klein's office downtown. Her firm specialized in intellectual property and high-stakes corporate disputes, the kind of place with glass walls, heavy doors, and a receptionist who barely blinked. I arrived 10 minutes early. Charles showed up 10 minutes late. When he walked in, I noticed he looked thinner. His hair was grayer than I remembered. And for the first time since I had known him, his signature arrogance had softened into something else. Fatigue. He sat across from me, smoothed his tie, and forced a tired smile. "Maya," he began, "this has all gotten out of hand. We should not be on opposite sides of the table." Teresa did not smile. She nodded once professionally and opened her notepad. Charles continued, trying for warmth that felt almost rehearsed. "I know things ended abruptly, and for that, I take responsibility. But Halden needs you. The Arcturus deal needs you. We are willing to offer a consulting arrangement, your rate, your terms. I just want to see this project succeed, like we always talked about." He used the word "we" so freely, as if the last few weeks had not happened, as if replacing me with his daughter had been a minor scheduling error. I did not respond. Instead, I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a plain folder, and slid it across the table toward him. Charles glanced at it, then opened it with cautious hands. Inside were several documents. The first was a signed declaration of intellectual ownership, filed with Halden's legal department 2 years ago, my signature at the bottom, and Charles's own initials approving the protocol. The next page included time-stamped records of the biometric system framework I had created. After that came the provisional patent paperwork I had filed under my name, just 6 weeks before the Arcturus contract had been drafted. It had his company's name nowhere on it. Charles read through the first few pages in silence. I watched the recognition creep into his expression. This was not a negotiation. It was a reckoning. "You erased me," I said evenly, "and now you are stuck with a ghost system you cannot control." He looked up, eyes narrowing, searching for some angle of defense. "We thought the system was part of your role at Halden. If it was developed on company time..." "It was built under an innovation clause," Teresa interrupted smoothly. "Your company signed off on that exemption, which gives Maya sole rights to anything designed independently and not directed by management. That includes biometric gateways, security schematics, and all proprietary layers unless otherwise contracted." Charles glanced between us. He had not come here expecting a lecture. He had come here expecting a favor. "I was loyal," I added, my voice low but firm. "For 9 years, I stayed late, flew across oceans, pulled all-nighters. I handled billion-dollar accounts, protected client trust, and never once asked for credit. You replaced me with someone who calls propulsion systems jet thingies. And now you want me to clean up the mess quietly?" He closed the folder and exhaled. "What do you want?" That question had hung in my mind since the moment I saw Isabelle on that magazine cover. It was never about money. Not really. It was about recognition. It was about respect. It was about never being treated like a footnote again. I leaned back in my chair. "I want the patent credited solely to me. I want a public correction in the next press release. I want my exit marked properly, with a statement acknowledging my contributions. And I want Halden to license my system, not claim it." Charles blinked, stunned. He had come in expecting silence, maybe a signature, maybe a quiet fix. What he found was someone who had already built her leverage and knew exactly what it was worth. He looked at Teresa. She gave a single nod, no emotion. "Give us the weekend," he said. "We will talk to the board." "You do that," I replied. As he left, I watched the door close behind him. It was not triumph I felt. It was clarity. Because once someone tries to erase you, there is no going back to how things were. And when you control the one piece they cannot replace, you are not just part of the story. You are the one holding the pen. 3 days after our meeting at Teresa's office, Arcturus issued a formal statement that sent ripples across the industry. The wording was cold, almost clinical, but the message was unmistakable. They were pulling out. The reasons listed were clear: protocol instability, lack of leadership transparency, and unauthorized architectural modifications. No one needed to guess who they were talking about. It was a direct hit, clean, public, and backed by every legal department Arcturus had on retainer. By the next morning, Halden's stock opened 23% lower. News anchors ran clips of Isabelle's disastrous interview. overlaying it with breaking headlines and panel commentary. Analysts who once praised the company's direction now questioned its future. Financial forums were flooded with posts calling it the fastest executive implosion of the year. Internally, employees scrambled. Project teams were locked out of servers they did not know they had lost access to. The systems Isabelle had promised to streamline now left gaps no one could patch. By the end of the week, Isabelle's name vanished from the company's executive leadership page. No announcement, no farewell. Just a quiet deletion, like they hoped no one would notice. But people noticed. Whispers moved through the aerospace world fast, especially among the tight-knit circles that actually understood what companies like Halden built. The consensus was swift. She had been in over her head, and Charles had bet on the wrong horse. I watched it all unfold from my apartment with a strange mix of stillness and inevitability. There was no glee, no popcorn, just the steady unraveling of something that had once been part of my life for nearly a decade. I thought of the interns I had mentored, the night shifts spent in conference rooms filled with empty coffee cups and blueprints. Halden had never been perfect, but it had meant something once. Now it was a cautionary tale. Charles stayed quiet at first, but silence could only hold for so long. A special committee was formed by the board. Their purpose: investigate the leadership decisions that led to the Arcturus fallout and review all intellectual property contracts signed in the last 3 years. It did not take long for my name to come up. I received a notice from Halden's legal team requesting clarification on the timeline of my biometric system. Teresa responded with the confidence of someone who had every receipt. The committee requested interviews. Charles was called in first. Reports later leaked that he appeared flustered and underprepared. One journalist claimed he brought up Isabelle's qualifications and was met with a board member's blunt reply, "We are not here to discuss her. We are here because of you." Another claimed that a second investor threatened to pull funding if the internal oversight remained unchanged. It was all speculation, of course, but the tone had shifted. No more favors, no more blind loyalty. In private circles, people began reaching out to me, not just old colleagues, but competitors, tech founders, and even former clients. Some just wanted to offer support. Others wanted to talk business. One message stood out from a CTO I had met years ago at a tech summit in San Diego. It read simply, "Saw what happened. If you ever want to build something of your own, let me know. We would back you." I did not reply right away, but the seed had been planted. The truth was, Halden's collapse was not about one system or one mistake. It was about what happens when leadership forgets where real value comes from. Not titles, not last names, not press clippings, but from the people who understand the work, who put in the hours, who build things that actually function under pressure. They erased me, and when the smoke cleared, they realized the foundation they had gutted was the very thing keeping the lights on. By the end of that month, Charles had stepped back voluntarily from his role, citing personal reasons. The board's investigation was ongoing. Internal damage reports were being assessed. Several confidential systems had to be rebuilt from scratch. Halden's next quarterly report projected massive losses. And I was fine. Better than fine, actually. I had the original code. I had my patent. I had offers, leverage, and time. More than anything, I had clarity. Let the old world burn if it had to. I was not going back. I was building forward. 1 month after Halden's collapse hit the headlines, I found myself in a quiet cafe in downtown Seattle. It was drizzling outside, just enough to paint the windows with that soft gray Pacific Northwest blur. I was sitting across from Daniel Reese, the same executive from Arcturus who had once called me confused and irritated. But now, he was calm, clear-eyed, and genuinely curious. He did not waste time. After a few pleasantries, he set his coffee down and said, "We would like to bring you in, strategic advisor to Arcturus Advanced Systems. Name your conditions." I paused, not because I needed time to think, but because I wanted the moment to settle. This was not about revenge. It was about being recognized. I had worked too long behind the scenes, too often in rooms where my ideas were praised, but my name left off the record. This was different. Arcturus had seen the disaster unfold, and they had connected the dots. They knew where the real work had come from. They understood that I had not sabotaged anything. I had simply left. Daniel leaned forward and added, "We are not looking for a face to put on a brochure. We want systems that last. We want people who can see beyond quarterly reports and PR spin. I nodded. That was something I could work with. We talked terms. I made it clear I would not be tied down to office hours or middle management politics. If I joined them, I would operate on vision and execution. Nothing less. He agreed without hesitation. Accepting the offer felt like stepping into light after a long tunnel. I had not realized how much weight I had been carrying back at Halden. For years, I had adjusted myself to fit into a company that could not make room for me. I had worked under a boss who promoted flashover function, who valued legacy over merit, and when he erased me, I had let the system speak for itself. No sabotage, no flameouts, just silence and consequences. The truth was, Charles had never understood how fragile his empire was. It was never built on innovation or strategy. It was built on shortcuts, names, and the illusion of control. When I walked away, I did not take revenge. I took the keys. The biometric gatekeeping was not a stunt. It was protocol. The patents were not a surprise. They were dated, signed, filed properly, and buried in plain sight. What collapsed was not my doing. It was the inevitable result of replacing substance with style. Isabelle? I had not heard from her since her profile was wiped from Halden's website. Rumor had it she moved back to California. Some said she was consulting, others claimed she was rebranding. Either way, she was out of aerospace, and the silence was probably the smartest thing she had ever done. As for Charles, last I heard, the board had stripped most of his authority. Publicly, he cited burnout. Privately, insiders said he was still trying to explain how one woman's departure had cost the company hundreds of millions. It felt strange to be at peace, especially after everything. But I was. The anger had passed. What remained was clarity. I had my name back, my time back, and now, a seat at a table that did not require me to fight for space. I was not looking for validation. I had already earned that. What I was building now came from a deeper place. Not vengeance, not pride, just vision. Before we parted ways, Daniel looked at me and said, "It is rare to meet someone who lets the work speak loudest. You handled everything with grace. That matters more than you think." I thanked him and walked out into the Seattle mist. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried that clean, quiet energy that comes right after a storm. This was not about burning bridges. This was about building a better one. And this time, I was the architect.